What if losing everything was the only way to find yourself again? This is the story of a billionaire who lost her memories on the streets of Ghana, and found a destiny that would change a nation. Victoria Hayes was a woman whose name commanded respect and fear in equal measure. At just 32 years old, she had risen to become one of the most powerful figures in Ghana. As the CEO of the Hayes Group, she built an empire that stretched across luxury hotels, high-end apartments, and prestigious office complexes in Accra, Kumasi, and Takoradi. Businessmen admired her brilliance, rivals feared her aggression, and employees whispered about her icy nature. Victoria was known not for kindness but for her relentless ambition. That evening, she attended a high-profile gala in East Legon, dressed in a sparkling gown that turned heads. Cameras flashed as she stepped onto the red carpet, her beauty and poise undeniable. Yet behind the glamour, she carried the weight of someone who trusted no one and loved no one. Success had given her everything, except peace. As the night wound down, Victoria left in her sleek black Range Rover. The roads were quiet, and the air carried the scent of the sea drifting from Tema. She sat at the back, scrolling through her phone, giving curt instructions to her driver. But fate was waiting. On the dark stretch of the Tema Motorway, a heavy-duty truck lost control, swerving into their lane. The collision was violent, the kind that shattered glass, twisted metal, and silenced lives in seconds. Her driver died instantly. The vehicle spun and crashed against the barrier. Victoria's world went black. When she opened her eyes hours later, she was no longer surrounded by leather seats and tinted windows. She lay on a hospital bed at Koralbu Teaching Hospital. Bright white lights stung her eyes, and the smell of antiseptic filled her lungs. Her head throbbed, and her body felt weak. But the greatest wound was invisible, her memories were gone. Doctors tried to ask questions, but she could not answer. She did not know her name, her home, or why she had been in the car that night. The only thing she recognized was pain and emptiness. To make matters worse, during the confusion of the accident, her jewelry, handbag, and phone had been stolen. There was no ID, no money, and no family rushing to her side. After days of treatment, the hospital could do no more. She was alive but a blank slate, stripped of everything that once defined her. Without identity, she was discharged quietly, almost like a forgotten soul. The once mighty billionaire stepped out of Koralbu's gates with nothing but the clothes she wore during the crash, torn, stained, and unfamiliar. Her eyes searched the busy streets of Accra, filled with the honking of trotro buses, the cries of hawkers selling roasted plantain and sachet water, and the endless flow of strangers who brushed past without a second glance. Victoria Hayes, the woman who once owned skyscrapers, was now nameless, powerless, and lost in the very city she had ruled. And as she stumbled into the chaos of Accra, unaware of who she truly was, destiny quietly began to rearrange her life. With no memory and no direction, the woman once known as Victoria Hayes drifted through the crowded streets of Accra like a shadow. The city, alive with honking cars, shouting traders, and blinding neon lights, felt overwhelming. Her feet grew heavy, her stomach ached from hunger, and her heart carried only confusion. One morning, she found herself at a bus terminal in Circle. Drawn by the swarm of passengers, she boarded a long-distance bus heading north, unsure of where it would lead. She pressed her forehead against the dusty window as the vehicle rattled out of Accra, past rolling green hills and villages lined with cocoa trees. For hours, she stared at the road, watching strangers laugh, trade food, and share stories. She sat in silence, a woman without a past, drifting into an unknown future. The journey ended in Obuasi, a gold mining town known for its red earth and bustling energy. Here, the rhythm of life was slower, the air filled with the smell of palm oil cooking and the distant sound of hammers striking rock. Tired and lost, she wandered the market square, her presence drawing curious glances. She looked fragile, as if she did not belong, yet no one recognized her as the powerful figure she once was. Fate brought her into the path of Daniel Grant, a 34-year-old nurse who worked at a small clinic nearby. Daniel was respected in the community for his kindness, often treating patients who had no money to pay. When he saw the confused stranger sitting alone under a tree, he felt compelled to help. He offered her a place to stay in the small compound he shared with his aging mother. In Obuasi, her life transformed completely. For the first time, she experienced the rhythm of ordinary life. She fetched water at dawn, carrying heavy buckets from the borehole alongside other women who laughed and teased each other. She learned how to prepare simple Ghanaian meals, stirring thick banku with aching arms and grinding pepper in an earthenware pot. She helped Daniel's mother sell tomatoes and onions at the market, her once manicured hands now stained with red dust and palm oil. The community embraced her, though they knew nothing of her past. They called her Ama, a name Daniel's mother gave her, meaning she was born on a Saturday. For the first time, she felt warmth not bought with money but given freely. Children followed her with playful giggles, neighbors invited her to share meals, and nights were filled with the sound of crickets instead of the hum of air conditioners. Within weeks, the woman who once ruled boardrooms with cold authority found herself laughing at simple jokes, smiling at the sunrise, and resting her head in peace. She discovered a side of life she had never known, the beauty of simplicity, the strength of community, and the joy of giving without expecting. And as she watched Daniel quietly mend broken bodies in his humble clinic, a strange warmth stirred in her chest. It was unfamiliar yet comforting, the beginning of an emotion she could not name, but one that would shape her destiny. She had lost her identity in the chaos of Accra, but in Obuasi, she was slowly gaining something far greater, a new life. While the woman called Ama settled into her quiet new life in Obuasi, far away in Accra, the empire she had built began to tremble. The Hayes Group, once led with ruthless precision, was now under the control of Richard Hayes, her cousin and interim CEO. Unlike Victoria, Richard had no vision, only greed. Board meetings turned into schemes, contracts vanished into private accounts, and valuable company assets were quietly sold. Rumors spread among employees, but no one dared question him. The shadow of Victoria Hayes was fading, and Richard intended to erase it completely. Back in Obuasi, Ama continued her days in simplicity. Yet as she grew more comfortable, her nights became restless. Dreams disturbed her sleep, flashes of tall glass buildings, elegant office chairs, and long boardroom tables. In her dreams, she heard a woman's voice calling her name with urgency, though the name never reached her fully. Some mornings, she awoke drenched in sweat, clutching her chest as though her heart remembered what her mind could not. One afternoon, the air in Obuasi buzzed with excitement. Daniel had received a delivery of medical supplies, wrapped in old newspapers from Accra. As Alma helped him unpack, her eyes caught a headline. On the front page was a large photograph of Richard Hayes addressing reporters at a press conference. Behind him, a banner carried the name Hayes Group. Something inside her shifted. The name felt heavy, familiar, almost like an echo that refused to fade. Her hands trembled as she touched the page. She did not know why, but the photograph of Richard unsettled her. His confident smirk, his hand raised in triumph, his posture as though claiming victory, all of it pierced through the fog in her mind. That night, her dreams grew sharper. She saw herself dressed in designer suits, walking through polished offices with glass walls. She saw employees rising to their feet as she entered, their faces respectful, yet fearful. She saw her reflection in a mirror, powerful, beautiful, and untouchable. But before she could grasp it fully, the vision always shattered, leaving her gasping in the darkness of her small room in Obuasi. The unease grew stronger. Simple life had given her peace, yet something deep within whispered that she did not belong entirely. Her hands, though now used to carrying buckets of water, sometimes itched with the memory of holding a pen, signing contracts, and sealing deals worth millions. Her voice, though gentle with children in the market, carried a tone that startled strangers, a tone of authority she did not understand. Still, the community knew her only as Ama, and Daniel continued to see her as the quiet, graceful woman who had entered his life by chance. But fate was already pulling her toward a truth she could not escape. In Accra, Richard smiled to himself as he signed away another piece of Hayes Group property. He believed Victoria was gone forever, erased by death or by silence. What he did not know was that her shadow still lingered in the red soil of Obuasi, slowly gathering strength, preparing to return. Life in Obuasi had given Alma a fragile sense of belonging, but beneath it, the restless pulse of another identity continued to stir. Each dream came sharper than the last, like fragments of a puzzle scattered across her mind. She had stopped denying it, there was a hidden self within her, waiting to surface. The turning point arrived when Daniel invited her to accompany him to Kumasi for a medical conference. It was a chance for him to connect with doctors and investors who might support his dream of establishing a private clinic. For Alma, it was simply another journey, another experience to add to the strange path her life had become. The bus ride to Kumasi carried them past lush green hills and cocoa plantations, the red earth glowing under the late afternoon sun. When they arrived, the city felt larger, faster, more alive than Obuasi. Modern billboards towered above trotro stations, and the streets buzzed with students, traders, and professionals. Alma followed Daniel into the elegant hotel hosting the conference, unaware that destiny was waiting inside. The moment she stepped through the glass doors of the lobby, eyes turned. Conversations paused. Staff members whispered and exchanged quick, stunned glances. Their gazes lingered on her with recognition so strong it made her uneasy. She could feel the weight of their stares pressing against her as though she were a ghost walking among the living. At the front desk, the hotel manager froze. His smile faltered, his hands stiff as he adjusted his tie. Slowly, he reached beneath the counter and pulled out a glossy magazine. He placed it gently on the desk, as though handling something sacred. Alma's eyes fell upon the cover, and her breath caught. The image was unmistakable. A woman in a sleek black suit, standing tall with piercing confidence, her arms folded across her chest. The headline read, "Victoria Hayes, the face of Ghana's future." It was her. The features were the same, though sharper and more polished. The eyes, bold and commanding. The posture, powerful and unshakable. She was staring at a version of herself she did not know but could no longer deny. Shock rippled through her body. Her knees weakened, her heart pounded, and for a moment the world around her blurred. The truth had been hiding in plain sight all along, she was not Alma, the nameless woman of Obuasi. She was Victoria Hayes, the missing billionaire of Ghana. When she returned to Accra days later, the city felt different. Its towering buildings and congested streets no longer seemed strange. They felt familiar. Each landmark whispered to her, each street corner carried a memory just beyond reach. Her driver took her past the Hayes Group headquarters, a skyscraper of steel and glass, where her name still hung proudly across the entrance. Yet inside, it no longer belonged to her. Victoria walked into the boardroom unannounced. The directors gasped, jaws dropping, chairs scraping against the polished floor. They had buried her in their minds, but here she stood, alive and undeniable. The air was thick with shock. But across the long table, Richard Hayes did not flinch. He leaned back in his chair, his lips curving into a cold smile. His voice, smooth and steady, carried the venom of betrayal. Though she could not recall every detail, his tone cut through her like a blade. To the world, he appeared calm and unbothered, but his eyes burned with calculation. He had spent months building an empire on her absence, and now she had returned to destroy it. The room was silent, the tension unbreakable. For Victoria Hayes, the woman who had lived two lives, the final confrontation was no longer a question of memory. It was a battle for truth, identity, and the soul she had only just begun to reclaim. Victoria Hayes had returned to Accra, but she was no longer the woman who had once ruled its skyline. The memories came back in fragments, boardrooms, contracts, luxury parties, but alongside them came another set of memories, mornings fetching water in Obuasi, laughter in the market, and the quiet presence of Daniel's kindness. Two versions of herself collided inside her, and she knew she could not live as both. Richard Hayes, in his arrogance, believed victory was still his. He had tightened his grip on the Hayes Group, erasing records, altering accounts, and bribing officials to secure his hold. But he had underestimated the resilience of the woman before him. Though her memory had been fractured, her instincts had not. Piece by piece, she uncovered evidence of his fraud, hidden contracts, illegal transfers, secret dealings that could collapse the empire if revealed. With Daniel's steady support, Victoria gathered everything. Together they moved quietly through corridors of power, filing cases, speaking with lawyers, and placing her cousin in a trap of his own making. It was not a battle of fists but a battle of truth, fought with patience and precision. The day of reckoning arrived in the High Court of Accra. Journalists crowded the steps, cameras flashing as Victoria Hayes walked through the gates. Whispers rippled through the crowd, some said she was a ghost, others called her a survivor, but all agreed she was a force returned from the shadows. Inside the courtroom, Richard's confidence cracked as evidence piled high against him. His smile faltered when forged signatures were exposed, when fraudulent accounts were displayed, and when witnesses testified. For once, his arrogance could not shield him. The gavel fell, and the judgment was final. Richard Hayes was guilty of fraud and embezzlement. He was stripped of his position and sentenced, his empire crumbling before the woman he had betrayed. But for Victoria, victory did not taste sweet. As the court erupted in noise, she felt only a quiet heaviness. The empire was hers again, but the life that came with it no longer fit her soul. She had seen another world, one where people lived with little yet loved with much. She could not return to being the cold queen of glass towers. At a press conference days later, she stood before a sea of microphones, the city holding its breath. Instead of reclaiming her throne, she made an announcement that stunned Ghana. She would step down as CEO of Hayes Group. She would redirect much of her fortune into building schools, hospitals, and opportunities for rural communities across the nation. The first would be a modern clinic in Obuasi, the dream Daniel had carried for years. Gasps echoed, headlines blazed, and board members argued. But Victoria was resolute. She had lost everything once and discovered what truly mattered in that emptiness. She was no longer the billionaire who ruled by fear. She was a woman reborn by loss, betrayal, and love. Months later, in Obuasi, the sound of hammers and saws filled the air as workers built a new health facility on the red earth. Children ran around laughing, neighbors gathered in excitement, and Daniel stood at her side, his dream unfolding before his eyes. Victoria watched, not as a ruler above them, but as a partner among them. As the sun dipped low, painting the sky gold, she and Daniel walked through the village hand in hand. No titles, no wealth, no masks, only two people who had found purpose in each other. She thought of the accident that had stolen her memories, and she whispered to herself, she had lost her past to find her soul. And in that moment, Victoria Hayes was no longer just a name of power. She was a story of transformation, a life rewritten on the red earth of Ghana, where the greatest fortune was not money, but meaning. If this story moved you, imagine what's coming next. Subscribe now, hit the bell, and join us for more powerful Ghanaian dramas that will keep you on the edge of your seat.